welcome to the second or the first panel. I am very happy to see all these interesting politically engaged guests on this panel on 5 years after the Arab Spring, what happened to the actors. Let me briefly introduce the members of this panel, and then we will proceed with the questions on the panel for about an hour, and then you will have the opportunity to talk with our guests for half an hour. I am German-Algerian, but I will try to be German in the time management, because we have a lot of interesting questions to tackle, and I hope that 1 hour will be enough. Let me briefly introduce on my right Lina Benhani. She's a Tunisian researcher in linguistics, teaching at the University of Tunis, but she's mostly known for her political activism. She's the author of the blog A Tunisian Girl that became very famous during the Arab revolutions in 2011, and the author of a book in French or in English, what was it? Vernetzt euch? Blogueuse pour un printemps arabe, that you can see on the table in the front. Wael Abbas, also on my right, is journalist and blogger from Egypt, but also a human rights activist, writing for Misr Digital mostly. And you are very distinguished for your activism also since the revolution, but also before, because you never refrained from tackling difficult subjects like torture and disappearances and so on. I think we will talk about these subjects right now. Akram Belkaid was already presented to you, so I will skip the part to leave more time for the discussion. And finally, we have Jamel Touissi, who's also an activist from Morocco, and you are a founder of the NGO, a social enterprise, and Chantier de la Citoyenneté, an NGO that is working for civil rights and democracy. So it is an honor to host this panel after Akram Belkaid's talk. I think you beautifully introduced some of the problematics that we want to tackle during this panel. Actually, we are in front of a very diverse situation 5 years after the revolution. This became clear from your talk. In Tunisia, we are celebrating a new constitution, or 2 years ago, celebrating the launching of a new constitution. In Egypt, we are witnessing, as you said, Akram, the return of a dictatorship, the return of the Ancien Régime with a military-backed government. In Algeria, we have a gerontocracy and a very open succession process, parallel to a very hot social front. And finally, in Morocco, we have a country which presents itself as a modernist, reformist country that beautifully overcome the Arab Spring by a new constitution that is mainly cosmetic reform. So we see we already have very diverse situations, and actually I would like to talk again about shortly with you about the objective of the revolutions in order to assess what was achieved since then. And perhaps we can start with Lina Benhani, because Tunisia was the first country who started this revolutionary period.
Je vais parler en français.
Ça marche.
Ok. Donc oui, certes, la Tunisie est considérée comme un modèle aujourd'hui, mais bon, comme une Tunisienne qui vit en Tunisie, je ne pense pas que la Tunisie ait réussi à réaliser les objectifs de la révolution. Vous avez tout à l'heure parlé de justement ces zones intérieures, oubliées par tous, marginalisées, et c'est là que la révolution a commencé. Donc pour moi, c'est vrai qu'on a réussi à à écrire une nouvelle constitution qui n'est malheureusement pas appliquée. Ça reste de l'encre sur du papier, il faut dire les choses telles qu'elles le sont vraiment. C'est vrai qu'on a réussi à avoir des élections transparentes et tout ça, mais à quel prix? Moi, je tiens à vous rappeler que pour ces élections transparentes, le parti Nida Tounes, qui a eu la majorité la majorité de voix après les élections, a promis voilà, qu'il allait débarrasser les Tunisiens des islamistes, justement. Donc il y a eu la trahison des électeurs. Donc il y a eu ce consensus. C'est vrai qu'on a réussi à éviter une guerre civile, mais rappelons-nous des objectifs de la révolution qui peuvent être résumés dans le slogan, justement, qui a été mentionné tout à l'heure, emploi, liberté et justice, différentes formes de justice, justice sociale et justice en général, et dignité. Donc quand on voit ces trois axes, l'emploi, la liberté, la dignité, je pense qu'on est bien loin de la réalisation de ces objectifs. C'est vrai qu'à un certain moment, et je parle des premiers mois après la fuite du dictateur, on a eu un espace, une grande marge de liberté, mais même ces libertés sont menacées aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, en Tunisie, au nom du combat contre le terrorisme, qui est un nouveau phénomène en Tunisie, on a cette tendance à bafouer les libertés, les droits humains et tout ça. Donc quand il s'agit de l'emploi, la situation est pire qu'avant. Donc le taux du chômage a augmenté et c'est lié à plusieurs facteurs, dont l'instabilité du pays, la montée du terrorisme et autres. Et quand il s'agit de la dignité, on ne peut pas parler de dignité tant qu'il n'y a pas de liberté et cette stabilité économique et cette égalité sociale, l'emploi et tout ça. Ben, je reviens et je dis, malgré ça, moi je reste optimiste. Je suis déjà très fière de ce qu'on a réussi à accomplir. Pour moi, on ne peut pas parler du succès de la révolution tunisienne, mais moi je dirais qu'il s'agit bien d'un processus révolutionnaire. Ce que nous avons déjà accompli, ce n'était que le début. Il est trop tôt de parler d'un succès ou d'un modèle à suivre, mais je suis convaincue que ça va venir parce que justement il y a cette société civile qui a été toujours présente, qui a été toujours là pour faire la pression quand il le fallait, quand les objectifs de la révolution étaient vraiment menacés.
Thank you very much for this first assessment. I'm also very thankful for both of you that you already stressed the fact that we are not talking about a short-term spring uprising, but that it's of course a long revolutionary process and that we have to think in the long run. But before we go back to the points that you already mentioned, I would like to give the other panelists the opportunity to assess the situation in their country 5 years after the revolution. We continue with Egypt, of course, because Egypt was, in the chronology of the Arab Revolution, the second successful uprising that managed to topple a regime. Well, Abbas, can you give us your opinion on what was achieved of the main ideas, the main demands of the revolution in Egypt?
We had a successful revolution, but we committed a lot of horrible mistakes afterwards. First was that we left the square after Mubarak stepped down. Most of the revolutionaries did not realize that we were being run by a military junta. It's not only Mubarak, it's not only a dictator, it's not only the president, it's Mubarak, and behind him, Mubarak is just a front, and behind him is a huge gang of military people and businessmen who were stealing out our money and putting it in companies and banks abroad. And I think you've heard about the Panama Papers that was released recently, and saw the amounts of money that were stolen from Egypt, despite that after a revolution, those corrupt people were acquitted of their crimes or reconciled with the government and paid some money back and then back to business like Ahmed Aziz, the iron and steel tycoon in Egypt. So the mistake was that we left the square. We didn't insist on imposing the demands of the revolution before we leave the square. We let the military council run the country and appoint a prime minister who was loyal to them, despite that he tried to portray that he was from the revolution, and some fellow revolutionary, unfortunately, said that he's one of us and we welcome him, but he played for the military, of course. And we also accepted that we hold elections when the media is not yet free. The security situation in the street is not completely solved. The elections were held in conditions that were not suitable and fit for elections to happen. There were no guarantees, there were no real monitoring of the elections all over Egypt. So it ended up in deals done between the most powerful and organized power in Egypt, which is the Islamists, not only the Muslim Brotherhood, and the military, while the revolutionaries were kept aside. They both started playing games on us. You do not represent the revolutions, and that there are some revolutionaries who are pure and others who are not. Of course, the pure are the ones who are naive enough to be deceived by the Islamists and the military, and the ones who are corrupt and working for Western powers, though, are the ones who are defending rights and working on human rights and equality and stuff like that.
Well, sorry, we will shortly tackle the question of the actors. I would love you to keep this in mind so that we go into more details.
I'm just trying to tell the mistakes that we've made, and that's why we ended up this way. So to make it short, the Islamists came to power in apparently what it seems to be a democratic election, but in reality it was not, and it was revealed afterwards that there was a deal between them and the military. And the Islamists did not rely on the revolutionaries to empower themselves, to give themselves legitimacy. They actually relied on the military and the deep state to give themselves legitimacy. And the deep state was not really happy with them in power, was not pleased. So they played the Islamists too and removed them with the help of also, unfortunately, some revolutionaries who were not happy with their elimination from the scene. And then we ended up with the military power coming to the power in Egypt again, and being even much worse than what Mubarak was, and blunt about it to its own people, blunt about it to the international community. Okay, we have terrorism, we're facing challenges, so nobody talks to us about human rights, nobody talks to us about democracy and elections and anything like that.
These are important points. We will go back to them. I would like to ask also Jamel Twisi to give us his appreciation on what happened in Morocco. In Morocco in 2011, we also had a mass movement, the movement of the 20th February, that took to the streets and managed to put the monarchy under pressure. What happened? What happened to the demands the movement of 20th February put forth? What happened to these demands, and what also happened later to this movement?
Ok, je vais parler en français. Dans un premier temps, je tiens à remercier Africa Avenir pour l'événement, pour ce que vous faites ici à Berlin ou même en Afrique. Le fait de créer une dynamique africaine, aussi africaine, européenne, c'est très intéressant. Le Maroc. Bon, je vais essayer ça va être un peu difficile de parler juste de 2011 jusqu'à aujourd'hui, donc je vais essayer d'être précis, concis, et on va dire, je vais parler de 3 étapes ou 3 époques. de l'indépendance, 1956 jusqu'à 1999, de 1999 jusqu'à 2011 et de 2011 jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Ça va nous faire trois périodes. La période d'à peu près de l'indépendance, je parle dans les alentours de 1956, c'était l'indépendance du Maroc, mais le règne de Hassan II, c'était vers début 1960 jusqu'à 1999, qu'il était mourant, il avait un cancer de sang, et il a commencé à réformer, à intégrer, à ouvrir le débat avec les, on va dire les socialistes, les gauchistes, ou les gens qui étaient contre plus ou moins le système totalitaire. Et c'est là où a commencé les discussions avec Abdelrahman Yousfi, qui était un opposant du LSFP, l'Union socialiste des Fronts populaires, pour intégrer le gouvernement. C'était le premier gouvernement, ce qu'on avait appelé en 1997 le gouvernement de l'alternance démocratique. Et c'était la première fois où on voyait un parti de gauche, les partis de gauche, que ce soit le parti progressiste socialiste, le PPS, l'USFP, c'était en coalition. Des gens qui étaient, depuis l'indépendance, dans l'opposition, des gens qui étaient, par exemple, Yousfi, il était condamné à mort. Mais il est devenu Premier ministre en 1997. Donc, de 1997 jusqu'à 1999, la mort de Hassan II, c'était toujours la gestation. Voilà, un pas en avant, deux pas en arrière, encore une fois, deux pas en avant, un pas en arrière, sur ce processus démocratique ou de démocratisation, ce qu'on avait appelé à l'époque le gouvernement d'alternance. Et 99, c'est la mort de Hassan II, et c'est Mohamed VI qui a pris la reine. Encore une fois, du moment qu'il y a un gouvernement qui est là, qui a assuré la transition, on a pu ouvrir plein de dossiers. Je vais donner juste quelques éléments. C'était à l'époque, à un moment donné, où on se croyait vraiment dans la route d'une démocratie réelle. On a créé une instance, c'est l'instance Équité et Réconciliation, et on a ouvert les dossiers des années de plomb. C'est les années de règne de Hassan II, là où plein de monde était emprisonné. Je parle des gens qui ont été mis dans des prisons qu'on ne connaissait pas en temps marocain. On voyait les noms de ces prisons juste dans des rapports des associations, d'organisations internationales. Et on a ouvert ces dossiers, on a récompensé ces gens, on les a compensés par rapport à ces années de plomb. On a ouvert plein de dossiers de corruption. On a, c'était plein de chantiers dans cette période du Maroc, entre 1980, on va dire c'est surtout cette période 97 jusqu'à 2002, c'était une période là où un gouvernement, il a fait plein de travail. Après 2002, encore une fois, un nouveau gouvernement, mais c'est un technocrate qui a pris. C'est comme si le système, il a fait un pas en arrière pour dire, OK, on ne va plus jouer le même jeu démocratique, mais on va faire un pas en arrière et on va intégrer les technocrates pour gérer à nouveau le gouvernement et pour mettre dans le réfrigérateur les partis politiques, surtout les partis plus ou moins démocrates. Un nouveau processus encore de régression par rapport, oui, je vais essayer de régression par rapport à cette avancée démocratique, et je vais aller directement vers 2011 et le mouvement de 20 février. Bon, bien sûr, la Tunisie, après l'Égypte, le Maroc, c'était plein de jeunes qui ont été dans la rue pour demander plus de démocratie, plus de liberté, plus de droits, surtout les droits socio-économiques. Directement, il y a le système, moi je vais parler de système, pas nécessairement du roi, de la monarchie, mais le système qui est là, le système, et là je vais le dire, c'est pas que le roi, même les partis politiques, ils jouent le jeu, même les syndicats, ils jouent le jeu, c'est-à-dire c'est un système qui est là, qui a une mode de gouvernance qui leur va. Bon, je vais essayer d'aller plus vite, après dans les questions on peut développer. Une nouvelle constitution, là où il y a les trois types de démocratie. Démocratie directe, à travers les pétitions, démocratie participative dans les communes, les régions, avec une régionalisation avancée, et une démocratie représentative, on a un parlement et tout ça. Et je vais clore sur ce point, Mais en fin de compte, à l'instant, là où on est maintenant, le mouvement de 20 février, moi-même en tant que militant, je me dis à un moment donné, on était en train de se battre, et je vais donner cet exemple, comme si on était en train de se battre pour créer une cuisine bien équipée. En même temps, on s'est combattu pour avoir les meilleurs ingrédients. Mais on a oublié que si on a la cuisine, on a les bons ingrédients, les bons éléments, si on n'a pas les bons cuisiniers, bah c'est raté pour le déjeuner ou le dîner. Donc, à un moment donné, on doit revoir notre stratégie, sur quoi on milite et les priorités. Merci.
Thank you very much. You will have the opportunity to go to the other points in the discussion. Akram El-Qaid, you are here to talk about Algeria. Of course, you can also refer to other countries. But Algeria, as you already mentioned in the previous discussion, did not have this so-called revolution in 2011. But of course, as you said, it is in a continuous transition process since the beginning of the 90s. But still, in 2011, there was also a kind of mobilization. There were attempts to change something. And what's your assessment of the situation? I mean, you already mentioned the reasons why Algerians did not go to the street massively. I mean, they go to the street in local protests, but they don't do it collectively, massively. And what was the impact of 2011 on the situation in Algeria, and what did citizens then and until now demanded actually from the regime?
Well, in Algiers in February, March 2011, sometimes there were more policemen than opponents in the street. I mean, it was clear that the rest of the society was not involved, and they were not completely being convinced by the necessity to demonstrate and to try to contest the government. Let me maybe have an outlook maybe on what could happen. In the early 60s, there was this Algerian writer called Malek Haddad. He was writing in French, and he had this sentence saying that the storm was coming and that the storm would be huge. He was talking, of course, about the fight against France and colonialism, and of course the storm came and it was huge. Unfortunately, today we can say the same. We can say the same because the situation in Algeria is that the fact that the system, as it has been mentioned concerning Morocco, Algeria is also a system. The Algerian, we say le pouvoir, it's something very huge. We don't know who is at the moment, who is at the top, but it's le pouvoir, it's the system, a nizam. So the system is the same clearly since 1962. And this system has maybe one rule. They don't want to let or to share the power. I mean, it's clear. Since the early 60s till today, wherever is the situation is, wherever we had this experience of a little spring at the end of the 80s, the Algerian system doesn't want to share the power. And this system is convinced that he is the best for Algeria, and that you cannot trust the Algerian people, and that this Algerian people has to be treated as a kid, and that maybe the civil society is something invented by the West, and that the future has to remain between what we call the hands of what we call the revolutionary family. I mean, the people that were or supposedly were involved in the fight against France. So there are two possibilities today. The first, what we could expect is that maybe this system is going to understand that the statu quo is impossible, and that a transition and a reform has to come, and that maybe after the death of Abdelaziz Bouteflika, we can have maybe something like what has happened, not in the Arab world, but in Latin America, an opening, progressive opening in the political field. This is what is asked by many intellectuals in Algeria. They don't want a revolution. They don't want a revolution because they know that if you use violence against the system, you are going to feed the system, and the system is going to use this violence against the opposition and is going to be stronger than it was before. So this is this kind of point of view. You may not find people in Algeria today, even people from the left, or saying that we need a revolution. The majority, and because of what is happening in Egypt, in Syria, in Libya, are saying, well, we have to convince the system that it's time now to negotiate and maybe to have political reforms just to improve the situation. Unfortunately, the position of the system is that we're strong and we are not going to share anything. So this is why I am, alas, being convinced that in the coming years we are going to face a very, very difficult times in Algeria. I do not exclude a new bath blood in Algeria. The storm is coming, and this is what the Algerian government is not understanding. I mean, the situation, and we had tough times in the 90s, but what is coming could be harder. And we wrote it, we are saying it, but apparently the system is not understanding it. And of course today he has the money, he can buy the social peace, but it's not going to last. And one day or another, knowing the Algerian people, knowing the way it behaved in the past, in the 60s against France, but also in the 90s, the danger that is coming is that what we call the Algerian exception today, this image of a country that is presented as being stable compared to Libya and Syria. The danger is that tomorrow the main problem in North Africa is going to be Algeria again. And this is a warning signal. I'm not here to say just to frighten people or to say, but this is that we have to keep in mind. I mean, the storm may occur in Algeria if the Algerian system doesn't understand that it's time to open the political field.
Thank you very much for this assessment. Not very optimistic, but we can come back to this. I would like also to go a step back and allow you also to say something more about the actors who were involved. Actually, we had a very homogenizing narrative in 2011 on the so-called Facebook revolution, the issue of internet-savvy young middle class going to the street. But all of you already mentioned that these revolutions were mainly socio-economic in their demands. And of course, the people who went to the street, who lost their lives, mainly came also from marginalized regions. And I would like to give you the opportunity to go back to these points. I mean, stress this a little bit. I mean, who were the main actors and what happened to them?
Bon, jusque-là, on ne peut pas vraiment désigner les acteurs de cette révolution. Exactement, parce que c'est la révolution de toute une population, c'est le peuple tunisien. Mais comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, ça a commencé justement par ces habitants des régions marginalisées, oubliées de tous, qui souffraient vraiment de la dictature et de son impact socio-économique et tout ça. Donc ça a commencé avec ces gens-là. Moi, j'ai jamais été d'accord avec les gens qui disent c'est une révolution Facebook ou une révolution Internet. Je trouve que ça a été vraiment... je trouve que le rôle d'Internet, des réseaux sociaux a été vraiment exagéré. Certes, ils ont joué un rôle très important, mais on ne peut pas parler d'une révolution Internet. Les gens des régions marginalisées, suite à l'immolation par le feu de Mohamed Bouazizi, sont sortis dans la rue. Ils ont fait face aux balles réelles, au gaz lacrymogène, et certains d'entre eux ont sacrifié leur vie pour cette révolution. Donc, on ne peut pas parler d'une révolution Internet, mais on ne peut pas non plus oublier le rôle d'Internet et des réseaux sociaux qui ont facilité les choses, qui ont fait que ça se passe vite, qui ont fait que le monde sache ce qui se passait vraiment en Tunisie. Il ne faut pas...
In the next panel, we'll talk more about media, but yeah, that's an important point.
Oui, je continue ce point. Il ne faut pas oublier que par rapport à la liberté d'expression et par rapport à l'information, le régime tunisien était vraiment très strict. Je pense que c'était le plus strict et le plus qui censurait les opinions des opposants, des activistes. Donc c'est le rôle joué par Internet, par les cyberactivistes, par les blogueurs, informer les gens. Mais il ne faut pas oublier d'autres éléments qui ont fait que la révolution, que le départ de Ben Ali soit réussi. Il y a le rôle de l'UGTT, l'Union des travailleurs, les syndicats, et puis tous les Tunisiens, peu à peu, ont compris la nécessité d'un tel changement et se sont impliqués dans les manifestations. Donc, moi, j'estime que c'est la révolution de la majorité des Tunisiens, sauf bien sûr ceux qui sont restés loyaux au régime jusqu'à la dernière minute, ceux qui essayaient de discréditer les manifestations et ceux qui essayaient de faire le changement. Donc, c'est un peu ça.
Thank you very much. Well, you have the opportunity now to go back to the points you mentioned already. I mean, this divide on who was actually the core of the revolutionary forces and what happened to them, especially because some of them talk about the feeling of being betrayed, the revolution being hijacked.
Egyptians are not revolutionary by nature. Revolutions in our history are very, very rare. Some of them happened during the Pharaonic times, during Ramses III, for example, and sometimes after the Islamic invasion, the Copts revolted against the taxes and stuff like that. Not really for religion, but for taxes and unjust laws and stuff like that. Egyptians mainly are farmers. They love stability. They adore, they worship stability. They sow the seeds, they irrigate the land, and they wait until the plants grow up, and then they pick them up and sell them, and that's how life goes on in Egypt. They really always hated confronting the regime, hated revolting, hated carrying weapons and stuff like that. So the core of the revolution in Egypt was mainly young activists, intellectuals, people who were able to use the internet, people who joined political parties. And when we've seen what happened in Tunisia, I think a lot of people got jealous. This is Tunisia. We always lose for them in football. How can we lose for them in revolution too? Like, they removed the president in a few days. Okay, we're gonna remove our president too in a few days. And we did. But
because you are Dunya, of course.
Yeah, because we are Dunya, of course. This is what got us in this situation at the moment. So the people who started revolting were a few activists who gathered in Tahrir Square from political parties from different backgrounds. The Islamists did not want to participate. The Muslim Brotherhood said clearly that we are not going to join, but if the young people of the movement are wanting to join, then they are let them go. But we are not officially joining in. I believe that was going to be a protest. I never believed that it was going to escalate and become a revolution. But the thing is, lots of people joined in for different reasons. Some people joined because they wanted to know what's going on exactly. Some people joined because there was no internet and no phone telecommunication because the government shut them down and they wanted to see the reality of what was going on. Some people were watching on television as the police was throwing water at the protesters who were praying on the bridge, and they didn't like that, so they joined for like kind of religious reasons. Others, they had the problems with living with the government, so the people who joined at the end were from different backgrounds, and they joined for different reasons. But we managed, I claim that we managed to unite them all under a few demands, which we posted on a huge building in Tahrir Square. It was a huge piece of cloth, and we wrote all the demands and we vowed not to leave the square until these demands are met. But in the middle of the 18 days, there were like events that happened that would affect things. Like Mubarak gave a speech, for example, and he said that this is going to be his last term. And so some people said, okay, let's go home. We have accomplished the mission, including Wael Ghunaim, who said, mission accomplished. He wrote this on Facebook. And we said, no, we're not going to leave. It's not about Mubarak leaving at the end of his term. We want Mubarak to leave now. And there were also discussions about who's going to run the country after Mubarak is deposed, because we were content that we're not going to leave until Mubarak leaves. And the discussion ended up in the camp saying that the army should run the country because the army is the most organized, is the most big organization in this country, is going to take over after Mubarak left. I was against that, and the people who were against that were accused of being Zionists. You are a Zionist, you want to destroy our army, you don't want our army to remain strong as it is. So, okay, you had your army, and you had your army strong, and you had it running the country. The army started appointing ministers, started negotiating with the revolutionaries. But the army negotiated with the revolutionaries. They picked specific revolutionaries and called them the Itilaf Shabab al-Thawra, the coalition of the youth of the revolution. And they started convincing them with ideas, but at the end, the young people realized that they are being fooled. So the army said, okay, you're not the ones who are representing the revolution, really. There are other coalitions that we won't include. And they asked all the coalitions to join in a theater belonging to the army in Salah Salim Square in eastern Cairo, and it was chaos. A lot of people boycotted, and we found out that there were coalitions that were formed to support the military rule. And then there were elections, and it was decided that the elections are going to be held, despite that protests were not acceptable. Making propaganda for your political party or political movement is not acceptable, and it ended up with a majority of Islamists in a parliament. And the parliament was a joke. We called it the Kandahar parliament because we felt it was like they were discussing stuff like we need to allow little girls to get married because it's allowed in Islam, and you know, stuff like controversial stuff like that doesn't really abide by the rules that we agreed upon on Tahrir Square, and the Islamists agreed on these rules too. We were supporting women's rights, human rights, the rule of law, secular society, not a religious society. But after they realized that they are the biggest entity in the country, they started imposing their own beliefs on the others, until they won the presidential elections and ended up with Morsi. And then the military and the media supported the media that is supported by the military, and that also was created to support the military, started campaigning against Morsi. And a lot of people...
Looking at the time, I have to cut you a little bit short.
It's
the good news,
very complicated and very...
I know, but the good news is that we still have 6 hours of debate in the next panel, so we will have the opportunity to raise. But thank you very much. Perhaps we can synthesize a little bit this question in order to gain some time. Actually, in Morocco and in... yeah, I mean, the question actually is also, I mean, we heard about the from Lina and Wael that the revolutionary coalition was very broad, of course. I mean, ranging from conservative forces, but also workers' movement who worked for years already to change the situation on the ground. Women, of course, young, urban poor, whatever. How did it look like in Morocco and in Algeria? I mean, who are the people who go to the street in these countries? And actually, what happened to them? Very briefly, please.
Ok. Bon, Je vais rebondir sur le point là où je me suis arrêté pour enchaîner avec votre question. Donc, le fait de préparer la cuisine ou le cuisinier. Et je trouve que c'est très intéressant. À un moment donné, lorsque le système réprimait les gauchistes et les libéraux au Maroc, il y avait les islamistes qui étaient là, bon, les islamistes, qui étaient là, qui faisaient le travail de proximité. Ils ont créé des associations et là, je trouve que c'est très intéressant de voir ça, que ce soit au Maroc, en Algérie ou même en Tunisie, ce travail de proximité qu'ils ont hérité ou qu'ils ont, on va dire, dupliqué du travail des socialistes ou des gauchistes à un moment donné au Maroc, mais ils l'ont développé, ils ont fait un travail de proximité. Là, je parle avant 2011. Ils étaient là, ils ont créé plein d'associations qui faisaient des colonies de vacances pour les enfants, qui aidaient les familles. Une fois il y a quelqu'un qui est mort, ils seront là pour l'aider, pour préparer le dîner, tout un rituel et tout ça. Du coup, ils ont cette confiance de la population, cette confiance de proximité des gens. 2011, nouvelle constitution, nouvelles élections législatives. Hop, le premier parti politique, c'est le PJD, c'est le Parti Justice et Développement, qui est un parti islamiste. Et c'est la première fois qu'un parti politique au Maroc a 108 sièges de parlementaires. C'est presque. Bon, la majorité, c'est dans les alentours de 175, bon, allez, 180. Ça veut dire qu'ils étaient pas loin. Bon, en fin de compte, dans le processus d'organisation du gouvernement au Maroc, c'est rare où on peut avoir un seul parti, donc 4, 5, comme c'est le cas maintenant. Et maintenant, on a un parti politique majoritaire. Bon, c'est pas majoritaire, mais le premier dans le gouvernement. Et encore une fois, dans cette préparation des politiciens ou des gens qui vont utiliser cette constitution démocratique. Dans le gouvernement, on a un parti politique qui est islamiste et on a le PPS, le Parti progressiste socialiste. C'est l'extrême gauche, mais qui est dans le même gouvernement. Et c'est un peu bizarre. Comment ça se fait qu'il y a un gouvernement, il y a le chef du gouvernement et un parti qui est islamiste et un parti qui est de l'extrême gauche et qui sont dans le même gouvernement pour gérer le quotidien au Maroc. Encore une fois, c'est pour comprendre un peu comment on fait un pas en avant et des fois 2 pas ou même 3 pas en arrière. Après, on saute et on... aussi maintenant, les chantiers qui sont ouverts au Maroc. Si on me demande, est-ce que vous êtes satisfait, je vais vous dire, ok, ça dépend de est-ce que vous me demandez, et moi en tant que dans le système ou en dehors du système. Si vous allez me demander si dans le système, est-ce que je sois satisfait ou non de la chose, sûrement en tant que jeune, même si je n'ai pas tous mes cheveux, mais non. Il y a beaucoup de travail à faire, surtout au niveau des politiciens, surtout au niveau de fait de s'octroyer la démocratie au Maroc et de la gérer. Ça, c'est un grand cas, c'est un grand problème. Mais si vous me dites, en dehors du système, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez? Je veux dire, il y a une grande évolution entre les années 90, 2000 et maintenant du Maroc. À un moment donné, la politique, c'était non, il ne faut pas parler de politique. Attention, les murs, ils écoutent. Il faut faire attention, il ne faut pas parler du roi, il ne faut pas parler du gouvernement, il ne faut pas évoquer ça. Là, ce n'est plus le cas. C'est-à-dire que, bon, je ne vais pas utiliser le terme de révolution, mais on est dans cette évolution continue. Je crois que on se rejoint, le Maroc et l'Algérie, dans ça. On est dans ce processus de changement. Il y a le système, avec un grand S, qui pousse pour maintenir toujours le pouvoir, pour rester là, parce qu'il a ses raisons. Bien sûr, il y a les richesses, il y a le pouvoir et tout ça. Il y a la société civile, la société politique qui sont là, encore une fois, pour pousser, pour avoir plus d'espace. Et dans ce jeu de va-et-vient, c'est pas toujours gagné pour la société civile et pour les politiciens. Pourquoi pas? Pour X raisons. Il y a l'hétérogénéité. Le Maroc, c'est pas, je sais pas, le nord du Maroc, c'est pas la même pensée que le centre, c'est pas la même pensée que le sud. Il y a aussi des élites qui sont là et qui veulent plus garder ce système parce que même si c'est des acteurs de la société civile ou des acteurs politiciens, ils ont intégré le système d'une façon ou d'une autre, et ils veulent que la chose ou le Maroc reste comme il est, parce qu'il profite, parce qu'il bénéficie de la situation. Donc, et je vais clore sur ça. Encore une fois, on doit comprendre, encore une fois, on ne doit pas faire la liaison directe entre révolution et démocratie. La révolution, on peut la maintenir en 24 heures, un mois, 2 mois, et c'est bon. Mais la démocratie, c'est un processus. C'est un processus qui est là de changement au niveau des lois, au niveau des constitutions, de changement surtout, et c'est là le grand problème, c'est là le grand challenge, aussi au manque de comportement de quelqu'un qui était là, tranquille, n'a pas de problème, les autres gèrent pour lui.
Merci Jamal, merci.
Okay.
Je suis désolée, je dois être un peu disciplinante. So because we are coming to the end of the discussion on this panel, and I want to give the public the opportunity to talk to you, but I still wanted to tackle some crucial points. I mean, we saw from what all of you said, and Akram, I will come back to you, I didn't forget you, is that of course there's a big challenge for those who engage in street politics. The question of what can or how can they bring the achievements of what they did on the streets into institutionalized politics. And we all saw that some of these actors were caught by counter-revolutionary forces or the old regime. We discussed in the first part of this of the morning also the different trajectories, and of course the situation in Tunisia, despite all problems, is still more promising than, for example, in Egypt, I would say, or in the other Maghreb countries. But I wanted to go back to the question of the room of maneuver of actors. I mean, those who are now facing the return of the old regime, those who are facing opposition by conservative forces. I mean, how do the core actors of the revolution actually still continue the fight? How do they still try to realize their objectives? What are the strategies?
Malheureusement, en Tunisie aussi, je pense, comme l'a raconté, ouais, les acteurs majeurs de la révolution ont cédé le terrain à un certain moment, et voilà, ce sont des politiciens qui n'ont jamais cru en cette révolution, qui ont pris ce terrain-là et ont manipulé les objectifs de la révolution. Je dirais que ça dépend de quel acteur on parle. Tout d'abord, il y a les jeunes chômeurs qui sont généralement des diplômés, et il y en a qui ne sont pas diplômés et qui pensent que rien n'a changé pour eux, qu'ils ont été exclus de la prise de décision après le départ du dictateur, et qui continuent à manifester, à faire des sit-ins. Donc il y a un peu plus d'un mois, il y a eu un nouveau mouvement de révolte, il y a eu même une certaine violence, mais le gouvernement a réussi à calmer cela. Mais ces jeunes-là continuent à manifester, à faire des sit-ins un peu partout. Je parle des jeunes de Kasserine, maintenant il y a des manifestations du côté de Qarqna avec une grande intervention policière, de la répression, et c'est un peu partout, ça continue parce que justement rien n'a été réalisé quand il s'agit des cyberactivistes par exemple, ça dépend de qui on parle. Certains ont choisi de continuer sur la même voie, la voie contestataire sur les réseaux sociaux, d'autres ont joint des partis politiques, d'autres ont créé leur propre association et organisation et se battent d'une autre manière, d'une nouvelle manière au sein de la société civile. Donc il y a certains qui abandonnent, mais la majorité n'abandonne pas et continue à se battre. Voilà, quand j'ai parlé des syndicats aussi, les syndicats continuent à se battre à leur manière. Donc il y a une certaine effervescence, il y a des gens qui ne pensent pas qu'on a vraiment réussi cette révolution comme on essaye de le dire un peu partout. On a réussi un tout petit pas, mais les plus grands pas restent à faire pour pour atteindre une vraie démocratie et surtout pour réaliser ce que dit le slogan le plus scandé pendant la Révolution, donc emploi, liberté, dignité.
Merci beaucoup. Well, in Egypt, of course, the situation is very gloom. We are hearing of cases of disappearances, torture, assassinations, and so on and so forth. Under these very difficult conditions, and under a situation of a high polarization of the society, how do activists still try to change something, to obtain something? How do they resist, actually?
Well, let me tell you about where are the activists now. Because some of them are buried underground, they're dead already. Others are in jail. Some of them are spending life terms. Very harsh jail sentences were given to activists in Egypt. Others are in exile, living in Qatar, Turkey, Europe, the United States. They cannot come back to Egypt. If they came back, they will get arrested. Others are running organizations trying to defend those who are in jail and those who are abroad and can't come back. But those who are running these organizations are being harassed too. In a recent case, Gamal Aid was running the Arab Network for Human Rights, and Hussam Bahkat was running the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights. They were banned from traveling. And even those who supported the coup of the 30th of June and supported the movement of Tamarud, sorry to say, some of these activists became like supporters of the junta. They became members of parliament now, like Mahmoud Badr, for example. And others are, despite the fact that they supported the regime, were banned from traveling, like Isra Abdel Fattah, and were sent to jail, like Ahmed Maher, the founder of the 6th of April organization. So the people who are left without a jail sentence or without dying are being questioned, like me. Why aren't you dead? Why aren't you in jail? Like I have committed some kind of treason because I'm not in jail now, or because I'm not dead. So this is how horrible the situation in Egypt is. But despite all of this, I believe that the activists who really believe in the revolution, who really believe that this regime that is running the country now is not legitimate and has made horrific slaughters or massacres against the revolutionaries, they are still trying to do what they can. I'm here to talk about what's happening in Egypt. Others are writing about it, defending the people who are in jail. I'm not a lawyer. I wish I were a lawyer to defend the people who are in jail at the moment. But we are trying to survive, and we're trying to face the challenges that we have. And we're also trying to make the world have a good look at what's really happening in the country. I think that the ones who are really watching closely now are the Italians, but that's only because an Italian guy was killed in Egypt. But the rest of the world will not care unless a foreigner or one of their citizens was killed in Egypt. The American Congress said that they support the Egyptian regime because it means stability. The unfortunately socialist president of France is selling planes and warships to the Egyptian regime, and he's completely silent about what's happening inside Egypt. Maybe Germany is a little bit better, but there is no real campaign against what is happening inside of Egypt. People are feeling sorry. Okay, they revolted and they have failed. We feel sorry for them. We told them that the Islamists are going to take over, but this is how things go. So this is basically the situation in Egypt at the moment.
Thank you very much. Akram Belqaid, I would like to ask you, I mean, again, in Algeria we know there was no massive movement, but there is a kind of everyday resistance of people. And of course, when I say resistance, I mean a very broad issue of, I mean a very broad meaning. I mean, resistance can be humor, resistance can be you know, fighting on the street. I mean, how are the strategies for ordinary Algerians, ordinary people, but also activists, to achieve some change and resist this kind of more and more authoritarian regime?
Well, you have a minority which is trying to react and to contest and to be against the government. They tried to organize demonstrations in Algiers, and of course the police was against them, and they failed in trying to gain a big, huge mobilization. Generally speaking, the behavior is that the common Algerian behaves as if he has nothing to deal with the government. I mean, it's an I don't care attitude. I do not respect the government, and I know that they are all corrupted, and but well, I have to deal with that. But in the same time, you know, you have some kind of debate. For example, some activists are convinced that the priority is to dispatch some knowledge of how to resist and to try to do what the political parties are not doing anymore. I mean, to try to give some political knowledge, trying to explain to people why they do have to resist and why do they have to protest. And you have to know that in Algeria, a political party is not allowed to organize a demonstration, for example. It's really difficult. You cannot organize a meeting in a place like this. It's really difficult to get the authorization. So this is why the political life is close to zero. And this is why sometimes the media, as I said before, is playing the role of a political actor. But in the same time, we have, as I said, sometimes some riots, people asking for water, others saying that they need a street coming, the road coming to their village, others protesting against the fact that social housings have been given to a part of the population and not the other one. So, and you have also sometimes things that were unexpected, and that prove that there is something going on in Algeria. For example, there was this huge resistance from the population in the southern part of Algeria against the shale gas and the shale oil, the exploitation of gaz de schiste et pétrole de schiste, shale gas. I mean, that was completely unexpected. We saw the population, men, women, kids, going out and saying they don't want this kind of activity because it's going to pollute the water and the ground. And the government was really surprised about this and had to step back and not to try to start the produce of this kind of hydrocarbons. So we had the same with the youth unemployed. I mean, in some places they organize themselves, they demonstrate, and they ask it for changes. This is why I say that we have many actors. They are trying to do something. For the diaspora, for example, the people, the Algerian living abroad, sometimes they are Franco-Algerian, maybe they are from Algero-German and living abroad. Some of them gathered in an organization and because they were working for many institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and they had a very great expertise in reforms. And they came with some proposals to the government and saying, okay, we don't want to maybe we can deal something. We don't want you to leave the power, but here are some proposals to reform Algeria just to improve the situation. And the result of this was that weeks ago there was this constitutional law that is being prepared forbidding Algerians that have another nationality to have official position in Algeria. I mean, the people from the system were frightened by the people from this diaspora saying maybe they are going to come back and to take our positions. So, you know, Edgar Morin wrote a really nice paper called La Métamorphose years ago. It's about France, But I mean, it applies for other countries. I mean, saying that in many places we have some little movements trying to change the things, but the problem is that they are not converging toward in main current. This is what is happening in Algeria also. I mean, few minor people trying to act, trying to protest against the fact that Abdelaziz Bouteflika presented himself for a fourth term, everyone knowing that he was not able to do so. But so they tried. You can find people acting in the cultural life, maybe, for example, protesting against the fact that some areas of Algiers are being right now destroyed by some companies just to make speculation. But once again, the main problem for I guess, is that there isn't an organized movement of force able to gather all these protests in a coherent approach towards any change.
Looking at the time, I mean, I still have several questions on my list, but of course I want to give you the opportunity to engage with our panelists. Jamal, in case you want to add something to this question, I mean, I think you already mentioned some of these points. Yes, please, and then we will go to the public.
2 minutes, donc, et je vais parler d'acteurs et l'état actuel. Donc, au Maroc, bon, comme je l'ai expliqué tout à l'heure, il y a plusieurs acteurs. Il y a le système qui est là, on va dire dans la tête. Il y a, on va dire, le roi, que actuellement, bon, c'est pas sur le plan visible, il s'est retiré de l'action directe. Il est plus dans la diplomatie internationale, la recherche de partenariats pour le Maroc et tout ça. Là, je parle encore une fois de la partie visible de l'iceberg. La partie cachée, il nous faut 3 heures ou 4 heures pour en parler. Il y a les partis politiques qui sont là en train... ils ont repris les mêmes traditions qu'avant 2011. C'est le jeu politique, le bras de fer, qui sera le premier avec... c'est le jeu politique d'avant 2011, avec tout cela représente. Il y a et là, les deux autres acteurs, c'est ce qui m'intéresse, la société civile et les jeunes qui étaient engagés dans le mouvement du fin février. La société civile au Maroc, maintenant, il fait un très très bon travail. Et elle ouvre tous les chantiers. Il n'y a pas de limite de pensée. Il y a des associations qui militent pour le droit de liberté de conscience, les libertés individuelles. Il y a plein d'associations qui travaillent sur ça. Je ne dis pas que c'est gagné à 100%, mais il y a la société civile qui travaille sur ça. Il y a des associations qui travaillent sur la préparation des pétitions pour appliquer la démocratie directe qui est citée dans la Constitution. Il y a plein de choses et la société civile, elle est en mouvance. Il y a le dernier acteur, c'est les jeunes qui étaient engagés dans le mouvement de fin février. Actuellement, la plupart de ces jeunes, ils ont intégré des partis politiques, ils ont intégré la société civile, au lieu d'être tout simplement des électrons libres qui militent pour des choses instantanées. Et les autres, ils ont créé de nouvelles associations, ou ce que j'appelle moi, les nouvelles formes de militantisme, ou les nouvelles formes de pousser le système à changer. Et il y a des activités, il y a par exemple le UX, c'est une union de changement du système éducatif qui font du bon travail. Il y a d'autres associations, Promotio, COC, et d'autres associations qui font ce travail. Ils ont récupéré un peu les idées qui étaient sondées dans le mouvement du 20 février. Ils ont mis en place des activités, des projets, des actions pour concrétiser ces pensées et pour, encore une fois, pousser le système. Lorsque je parle de système, c'est les partis politiques, les syndicats, le système, le gouvernement et tout ça, à changer et à s'adapter par rapport à ce qui a été cité dans la Constitution. Voilà,